On the far left is VAl Ackerman. She's the commissioner of the Big East Conference, the new Big East Conference. So she's got Villanova in the Final Four on Saturday playing the Big 12 commissioners team Kansas. So that'll be an exciting thing. Hopefully they can be cordial to each other.
May the best team win.
Commissioner Ackerman, in addition to the Big East, was the founding president, the first president of the WNBA. She's on numerous boards, including the president of, she's the president of USA Basketball, the national governing body for basketball in the United States. She's on the board of the U.S. Soccer Federation. So obviously she's incredibly well credentialed. We're very lucky to have you. Thank you for coming. And in addition, she was the captain of the University of Virginia's basketball team back in the day when she played. It couldn't have been that long ago. She played at the University of Virginia. A little bit of a sore subject, I assume. They didn't quite make it. Oh, the women's team made it out of the first round, so that was good. Yeah. Next to Commissioner Ackerman is Commissioner Bob Bowlsby from the Big 12. Before he got to the Big 12, he was the commissioner at Stanford University. Athletics director. Thank you, Dan. Is there a commissioner at Stanford? No. The athletic director at Stanford University, which they refer to actually Stanford. They consider it up in Palo Alto to be the University of Texas of Palo Alto. So that's a little joke for everybody. Tough crowd. So, and prior to that, he was the director of athletics at the University of Iowa. Seated to his right is Dan Beebe, who's the former Big 12 commissioner. Dan was also the commissioner at the Ohio Valley Conference prior to that, and now he runs a risk management global, I would say it's a global conglomerate that deals with workplace misbehavior and abuse issues. So without further ado.
All right. There we go. Testing. There we go.
Not working. There it is. All right, good. Well, it was interesting first panel with Greg and Chris. I had a little painful flashback to when I was commissioner, Bob, and Texas played Alabama in the Rose Bowl for the national championship, and had Texas not lost their quarterback Colt McCoy, I think we would have had a national championship. So in any event, it was good to hear those folks. Bob and Val agreed to come here at my behest, which I'm really appreciative of. Each of them owe me because I preceded each of them in positions to try to help their conferences, and by doing so, I showed the rest of their membership how good they had it when these two actually got in place, because they had a good comparison with me in those roles. So thank you. I won't call on you too many more times, but I appreciate you both taking the time out, because they're very busy. They do have a lot that's going on. I think, Bob, you told me you spent 142 nights in some other bed other than your own this year, and I remember those trips.
I prefer you characterize it as hotel rooms, not something that could be misinterpreted.
Yeah, especially in today's world. I should know better in the business I'm in too. So it's a pleasure to have you both here. And before we get into our agenda here, anything of the athletics director session you want to correct? Because I know as commissioners we oftentimes need to set the record straight with the athletics directors.
How long do we have? If we're limited to an hour, we ought to move on to your questions.
All right, we'll move forward. The first one is, for over 30 years, we've seen the influence media rights holders and exposure for conferences affect conferences' formation and realignment. Do you think it has been the biggest factor over the last 30 years or so in how conferences have been formed and the alignment of conferences, and what do you think about the future? Val?
Thanks, Dan. Well, first, I just want to thank you for inviting me to be here, and I really do owe you. Dan, when the old Big East broke up and the new Big East came into being, Dan was brought in by the presidents before I was hired to keep the trains running and did a great job, and I leaned on him a lot in those first chaotic months, so I do want to thank you for that. And it's an honor to be here with Commissioner Bowlsby, who's best in our business. So thank you. And I would just say on the ADs, I just want to say how much I respect what they do. They have really hard jobs. I mean, we kind of have it easy in the conference office in a manner of speaking, but there it's 24/7, 365. They have, you know, good days and bad days at the office, and I'm in awe of our group. And I know with the great work that Chris and Greg done, they're best in business quality also. So I supported everything they said, and just want to thank them for all they do for their student athletes. As it relates to you know, media and realignment, I mean, that's how the Big East is here. Really, the old conference, this predated me, and I've not been in college sports as long as others. But it broke up in part because the schools at that time were looking for greater revenue streams that they thought they could get if they made a move. Most of the schools in the old Big East landed actually in the Atlantic Coast Conference. And so my group of schools came together because they wanted to control their destiny a bit more and focus on basketball. We don't sponsor football in the new Big East. We have 3 schools that play it, but they play it in leagues outside of ours. We were very fortunate, though, because at the time that this separation by the now departed schools and the coming together of the new group was happening, Fox was launching a new cable network, Fox Sports 1, and needed programming. And so they saw in our group of schools an opportunity to get what they thought could be quality basketball programming, most of all, at a time when they needed it. And so that made possible, I would call it an above-market deal for national television coverage for the new Big East. That stream was important, obviously, for revenue purposes, but also for credibility and visibility. And so that possibility, that certainty, when Fox offered it, really made possible this decision of our schools to come together in this new form. You know, I think, you know, media rights and the availability of revenue will continue to drive the conversation. You know, that will probably influence other schools to make moves. We probably haven't seen the last of realignment, my guess. It seems pretty settled for now, maybe a few hops, but I don't think we've seen the last of movement. And my guess is if and when that happens, that will be driven by the decisions to seek better revenues than they've got, and that could in turn be impact and be impacted by the media rights landscape.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Well, I don't think anybody can dispute that that the changing environment in the media and media rights has played a role. As an example, having Maryland and Rutgers join the Big Ten was really all about capturing cable households. The University of Maryland and Rutgers University really had very little to do with the history and tradition of the Big Ten. There was an opportunity to capture the Washington ADI and to some extent the New Jersey, New York ADI, and you know, those things are valuable because the Big Ten had pre-negotiated the out-of-market rights, but they'd also pre-negotiated the in-market rights. So as soon as those areas became in-market as opposed to out-of-market, they got a lot more money for that. That's just one example. In some ways, I think it's sad what has happened because an awful lot of traditional rivalries have fallen by the wayside. And while it's driven a lot of money into the environment, we've commoditized institutions of higher education, and you know, when you start to see situations where longtime rivals, even border rivals, don't play each other for 6 to 8 years, oftentimes, there's a loss in that. And when you start to see some of the declines that we're seeing overall in national attendance, and you know, the institutions that are on top don't notice the decline, but overall football attendance has trended down. And I would suggest that some of that is due to the departure of some of the traditional rivals, and people don't put it on their calendar and circle it and write it down in ink like they once did. And so it's there's an evolutionary process, and I think that evolution is going to continue because delivery methods are changing. Ways to monetize media rights are changing. We're seeing decline in cable subscriptions, and we're you know, there was a time when everyone thought radio was going to go away, and we have more people listening to radio and more radio platforms available today than ever before. Likewise, broadcast TV was going to go away, but broadcast TV's carried in 126 million households in one form or another. So indeed, it hasn't gone away. But now with digital delivery, and I think it's one of the most fascinating aspects of the intercollegiate athletics landscape is just the speed with which the media landscape is changing, and how you go about accessing that and what impact it has on alignments are yet to be known. I think anybody who says they have a crisp vision of how that's going to play out in the next 3 to 5 years is delusional, because I'm not sure that anybody can accurately forecast that.
Yeah, and I can state that, you know, even commissioners have been consequences of conference realignment. So we'll go forward from there after that painful experience.
Do you want to speak first on the eulogy, or
you know, and getting into what you're talking about, you know, the model for so many years, especially with the advent of cable, you know, was built upon, you know, ESPN and some others coming in and charging everybody on cable for what a few would watch, and now we're seeing that dissipate, with ESPN going from over 100 and something subscribers down to 87 or so million subscribers at this point. And as you prepare as commissioners for the next round of negotiations, and you're seeing that kind of model dissipate, what are you doing in your conferences to try to address the next round of media and what it's going to look like? Because as you're saying, Bob, it's hard to keep it on track with that stuff, and you're in it every day. I'm not as much. What are you doing now?
Yeah, I'm sure Bob does the same thing at the Big 12, but for one thing, you monitor. I mean, part of our job is to try to keep up with these, all these, you know, rapidly changing developments in media. You know, I've brought experts into our board meetings just to tell them, you know, here's how many subscribers ESPN has lost in the last 3 years. Here's the new and emerging digital platforms that some of the pro leagues, for example, are sampling. Here's what viewer patterns are telling us in terms of particularly millennials, attention spans, how much live programming is still worth. It's still worth a lot, particularly in sports, I think. So I think this monitoring function is part of it. You know, we've got a long-term deal with Fox that doesn't run out for another 6 years, so I think they and we both are going to be spending the next couple of years just trying to assess where we are, and then, you know, again, our job is to get us ready when those back-end rights kick in and we can begin to have those conversations. That's one. Two, you know, we try to be good partners with our partner. So if it means, you know, they want to propose some cost-cutting measure, for example, remote production, and we don't think it's going to affect the look of our games, you know, we'd like to help them out. We've been pretty bold in our league about access. We actually this past year had 2 games, 1 men and 1 women, basketball games where the coaches were mic'd the entire game. These were commercial-free games where, you know, we had a 7-second delay, which was helpful on the men's side especially, for somebody to man the button. But, you know, Fox really wanted to do this because I think rightly they're suspecting that that's what viewers want. They want to get inside huddles. They want to know what's being said in a halftime speech in a locker room. They want to sort of get a feel for the banter that goes on between a coach and a referee during a game, and that's where the 7-second delay came in handy. But, you know, being, as I said, cooperative, collaborative with our partners to sort of get them feeling good about the relationship. The last, you know, one I would mention is just ratings. I mean, I think at the end of the day, broadcast partners are looking for eyeballs. And so, you know, they pay us good money and they monetize that through their sales to advertisers. And so part of the challenge for us is trying to find that fine line between games on days and times that work for us and our student athletes. Because if networks have their way, the games would all be in prime time, 9 o'clock at night, and that's not an easy time for either students or fans in our world. But you got to do some of that to hold up your end of the bargain. So, I think working through the next couple of years with our partners on the ratings game is going to be important. And then, I said finally, but I'll add this one too, doing what we can to help ourselves digitally. That's we have a digital network. We will not have a linear network in the Big East. I mean, we don't have the programming for that. So we have sort of cast our lot with a digital network, BEDN, Big East Digital Network. It's distributed on the Fox Sports Go mobile app. It's not an over-the-top network, although a few of the OTTs do carry it, which is good. But this is our way to get the many sporting events in our league that aren't going to make it to linear television. We have most of our women's basketball coverage there. We've got our Olympic sports on the digital network. So that's at least, it's a cost. It's not a revenue item in any way for us, although we now have a presenting sponsor of it. But it's just a way to get more of our stories told, because we don't think the linear opportunities are going to be there. So those are the kinds of things I think we try to stay on top of on behalf of our schools.
Great. Bob?
Yeah, well, I think that it's, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's an exciting time because of all the change that's taking place. And, when you see ESPN and Disney investing $3 billion in a company like BAMTech, principally a streaming company that emanated out of Major League Baseball, they don't throw around that kind of money capriciously. And when you start to see Nielsen rating away from home consumption for the first time in history. They did that last year, and we've already seen some remarkable numbers. When you look at the numbers that came out of mobile consumption on the Olympic Games this year, and the things that were done as an extension of the NBC TV package, it's clear we're migrating to a period where we may be watching the Super Bowl on the insides of our eyelids at some point in time down the road. And so who knows what technology will bring. The bundling that you mentioned that has been such a part of cable pricing over the last 2 decades particularly, is, there are signs of weakness there. There's no question about it. The people are wary and weary of buying things they don't want. And I guess all of us that have scrolled through the guide would say, gosh, there's nothing that I want to watch on TV a lot of the time. And so, the digital approach to it, where everything is menu driven, everything is cataloged, you can go to it and see it when you want it, and you can still have the option to watch live if you want to. And I agree with Val that live content is always going to be where it's at, and it's why sports is the coin of the realm, because people want to consume it live. There's lots of reality TV on the air in one form or another, but none is more reality TV than live sports. And I think that's particularly true of college sports, because it's much less predictable in many ways than professional sports. And so we have things, we have content that's very valuable. And although the delivery systems are evolving, I think that stuff is going to continue to be valuable. And so as we think about unbundling, as we think about the role that Netflix and Facebook and Amazon and Google may have in tomorrow's environment, I think there are lots of opportunities. And one of the things that occurred while I was at the University of Iowa was we went through a bidding process and an RFP process on our television rights. And at that time, ESPN was flatlining everybody. They had dropped the NHL. They had dropped NASCAR. They had offered not even CPI as an escalator on TV packages, and there was no market. There were no other. Fox wasn't involved in it. There were no other bidders on this, and the Big Ten network really emanated out of the fact that there was no market where we could create some competition. And it really was less about the vision of having your own linear network than it was being able to provide a challenge to ESPN at some level or another. And so now all of a sudden, the Big Ten network was a 10-year overnight success. People forget that it was, the first year that was on the air, you couldn't get the Ohio State games in Columbus. Jim Delaney got the absolute hell beat out of him for about 2 years until all the clearance discussions and fights had taken place. And so, now the SEC network is a huge success. Pac-12 network, it's a little early to see how that's going to all work itself out. But the fact is, it's still inside that 10-year window that the Big Ten was allowed before it became profitable. Mm-hmm. And so, they're just there's a lot going on in this space. I think there are lots of opportunities ahead, and I think it's impossible to forecast.
Well, I think that the Big Ten network, and I've said this at the time because I was in the middle of looking at that as in the Big 12, was the game changer for all of us. And the fact that Commissioner Delaney had the courage to get out with that changed it for the Longhorn Network, for the other conference networks. And it was interesting. I was on an IMG panel with, or observing. I guess I was in the lineup for another panel discussion, and the SEC representative, no offense, said that way of going and forming your own network is not going to work. And Delaney was on the panel, and this is when he was going through the carriage battles, and he stuck with it. And now look, the SEC's obviously found out that it is the way to go. So that whole effort when you were at Iowa and Jim Delaney was forming that network was one that changed the landscape for everybody, I thought, in college sports. Because you're right, there weren't competitors to get out there and bid.
There's in fairness, the linear network is a much more difficult model to use than the digital network is, because you're not bound by 24/7 365. On the linear networks, you have to generate 8,500 hours of programming. A lot of it is repeats, and it's reruns, and it's capture of other features from other places on a network, perhaps. But in the end, you don't want to go dark. You don't want to play the national anthem at midnight and go off the air until 6 o'clock in the morning. So when you go with a linear network, you assume the responsibility and the obligation to do 8,500 plus or minus hours of network programming. That's very difficult. And Chris and I have talked about it a lot. The Longhorn Network faces that because they really have difficulty filling 8,500 hours of programming.
Bob, no students in this room remember when the national anthem would play and the station would go dark until 6 in the morning like we would.
And by the way, there were only 3 stations, and they all went off at midnight.
Yeah, and you were your father's remote control because he would order you to change the channel, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. All we could do after midnight was drink heavily.
Everybody else thinks we wrote. Yeah.
And you couldn't watch a game on your phone.
Yeah. These students are looking at me like my children do that look like I rode in on a dinosaur. And maybe I did. So moving away a little bit from the media world and into what the athletics directors were discussing also was, the pressure really that college athletics is under. And they talked a little bit about the pressure to pay athletes, but I don't think I've seen a time, and there have been a lot of times when there's been pressure on college sports, but with the revenue, and I think in part, maybe this is from the old, kick to the curb commissioner, realignment has played a part in this, and there are others where there looks like, and there's been an attack on the effort to do things more about money, perhaps, than about the welfare of the student athletes. So how are you, with the FBI investigation that reveals what we probably a lot of us suspected was going on in some form or fashion, and as an old enforcement officer we couldn't get to, because we didn't have subpoena power and other vehicles to get people to testify. And with that, with the legal suits, we talked, Bob, previously about the Jenkins suit, which would completely turn upside down the college athletics realm if it was successful. That's the one to actually just open up the marketplace for players to get paid and bid on as student athletes, which I think would be tremendously disruptive. And the media scrutiny and other things. What are you doing in the conferences now, and what are you doing collectively in the NCAA to try to address these issues? Yeah, Bob, I'll let you go.
Well, I want to reiterate something that was said earlier, and that is athletic directors' jobs are getting more and more difficult all the time. There isn't any doubt about that. In fact, they are so overrun most of the time that they have to return emails during seminars. And so I want you all to forgive them for not paying attention to the sage advice that we're providing up here. But the, I just, campus jobs are tough. I think the plaintiffs' bar has their teeth locked on our ankles, and they're going to keep them there until we stop bleeding. And the people that brought the Jenkins lawsuit and the Alston lawsuit and the O'Bannon lawsuit have said they're going to challenge 12 other NCAA bylaws as being anti-competitive. And so, when you talk about the decision to pay players or not pay players, I really don't believe that college athletics is either professional or amateur. The model only exists, the co-curricular higher education model only exists in the United States. It exists nowhere else in the world, and it's really its own model. And it isn't purely amateur because they're getting a college education out of it. It isn't professional, certainly, because the compensation is tied and tethered to the cost of education and no more than that. And so it really is very successful in changing people's lives. It was mentioned about the comparison to the GI Bill, and it's been a life changer for a lot of people. Can it be better? Yeah, sure it can be better. There are things we've done with transitional healthcare and with going up to the full cost of attendance, so that the scholarship Chris mentioned, the kids coming to campus with the shirt on their back, or I guess it was Greg that said it, and some coming with significant resources. Well, providing the full cost of attendance takes care of a lot of that, because we all know it costs more than room, board, books, tuition, and fees to go to school. There are lots of incidental expenses that until 2 years ago weren't covered by the athletic scholarship. So we've done things with time demands. We've done things with what can be provided to families. We've made a lot of progress, but I think we will forever have lost our way if we depart from the student-athlete model. It's very unique. As was mentioned earlier, not only are 80 or 85% of the U.S. Summer Olympians coming from the college ranks, but about 40% of the world's Olympians are coming from kids that have come to this country to study and try and improve their craft as athletes. So, the soft underbelly of intercollegiate athletics has always been the amount of money that coaches are making. And now it's a little more that way because athletic directors are making a good living, commissioners are being paid a lot of money. There are others in the system that are making money. And it's easy to say, well, the poor student athlete gets nothing but a free education. Well, my guess is a lot of you out there that are going to end up graduating with a whole bunch of debt would like to be in the situation that a student athlete was in, ending their college career with no debt and a very high quality education. And because of the fact that they attend summer school most years, most student athletes are ready to graduate by the middle of their junior year. And so that's one of the reasons why the graduation rates have gone up so much. The football graduation rate's gone up about 15% in the last 5 years, and basketball's gone up about 12%. So, those numbers are good, but they're a little deceiving because with everybody going to summer school every summer, you just get there a lot quicker.
Sure. Wow.
Well, as usual, Bob said it all, but I'll add that it does sadden me to see the tough rap that college sports gets sometimes, because the fact is it's an incredible experience. I mean, I was one of those people. I was one of the early beneficiaries of Title IX that Greg and Chris both talked about. Title IX was passed in '72. I went off to college in the fall of '77. It was by no means equitable, by the way. But I got a full scholarship to go to the University of Virginia, school I might not have gotten into. Very competitive there for out of state. I was from New Jersey. But I got in, I got a full ride. I got a degree from an incredible place, and it changed my life. I just wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't gone to that school at that time and had the experience that I had. And I wasn't alone. You know, the fact is most of the student athletes within the NCAA aren't the football players that you see on national television in a college football playoff game. I mean, there's 350 schools in Division I alone. There's 1,100 schools in the NCAA, representing almost 500,000 student athletes. And most of those schools don't have the kinds of budgets that were alluded to earlier. They're making ends meet on a much different budget sort of directive from their boards and from their presidents. But they're making these opportunities available so these kids can compete. They can develop all the life skills that it's not a cliche. I mean, you know, life is all about time management. If any of you students want to be successful in your careers once you leave this great school, get used to time management. Okay? I mean, that's it. I mean, if you want to be successful professionally, if you want to have a family, if you want to have a social life, you know, you got to be really good at managing your time. And what better experience to learn that than being a student athlete, particularly at a place like this one. So those are all the things you're getting, and they're not written about them enough. You know, that's my sadness. And the value of the education, as Bob noted, is no small thing. I mean, to graduate debt-free, to have your education paid for, to get all the services that Chris and Greg alluded to. It's academic advising, it's meals, it's medical treatment, it's seeing the world in some cases. You know, we have student athletes who are going to games in countries outside of the U.S. I mean, these are the kinds of experiences you frankly can't put a price tag on, and I'm not trying to sound Pollyannish about it, but it's true. So that to me is the challenge. Part of it is a communications challenge, I think. You know, getting those stories told and getting that narrative, you know, straightened out. But to your question, Dan, about, you know, being in a commissioner seat, yeah, we have to sort of keep up with all of that. I mean, you know, my conference hasn't been the subject of litigations like some others have been, but we've gotten a couple. We've been sort of thrown in.
Would you like to be?
No, you know, we need Commissioner Bowlsby and his colleagues to help, and, you know, President Emmert and their teams of lawyers to sort of work that out for us. But that's always on the horizon. You mentioned the FBI investigation into college basketball. This is a very hot topic that's being addressed by a commission led by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. We've been told they're putting a report together. It's an independent commission. The membership of the NCAA has been asked to give feedback. Our conference did provide some feedback. I worked at the NBA for 16 years. I was first aide on the men's side, where I actually worked on collective bargaining matters, salary cap matters. The last aide, I was president of the WNBA, but I have a feel for all of that. And I do think that men's basketball players should be able to go to the pros right out of high school. The NBA made that rule change in 2005. LeBron James, who's been critical of the NCAA, was actually one of the early beneficiaries of the none and done rule, where he could go right away and start collecting on his rookie contract. I think those kids should have that opportunity. You know, we put together some ideas, and I think it would be good to see if a none and two is workable, if the union and the NBA could agree to refrain from drafting a player who elects not to go to the NBA out of high school, that they come to college. They're probably a borderline NBA prospect anyway if they're not going to the NBA directly out of high school. So that would give NBA teams more time to evaluate them. And it would create a little more stability for our coaches, because I think colleges are entitled to have you know, some demands here. I mean, college basketball, it's a big business, it's a complex operation. Millions of alums, you know, are implicated. You know, big universities are implicated. I think the coaches are entitled to have some stability and structure in their program. So that's why I think the none and two, the two-part, would be of value to college programs. But it's a very complex area, and you know, and I'll end with this, because you know, having been in the sport of basketball for a long time, I think what the FBI investigation back in the fall did expose was the lack of structure in the youth basketball area. As you know, Dan noted, I'm now on the board of U.S. Soccer. But I did serve for many years on the board of USA Basketball, including as the board chair. And I will tell you that pathway for young men and women as they work their way through youth basketball and travel teams or high school basketball, colleges, or not. By the way, there is no one and done in women's basketball. It's four and done. because I was part of the first collective bargaining agreement that was cut in the WNBA, and it's been the same ever since. You have to go to college for 4 years to play in the WNBA. So this is unique to men's basketball. It's not a basketball rule. But I think it's exposed the lack of structure in that youth environment. And I think it really lends itself to more regulation than exists now. And I think USA Basketball as a national governing body can be helpful in the way that U.S. Soccer is on the soccer side. But we'll see. This is obviously a hot topic in our sport and with incredibly important implications really for universities around the country.
Well, thank you. You know, one of the things I've argued for 25 years or so back to the old Professional Sports Liaison Committee is one of the, I think the biggest problem we have in American sports is not, and it's not under your control or the athletics director's control, is not having a farm league football system and a farm league basketball system like we have in baseball. There's nothing wrong with the young person who's not inclined to go to higher education and yet wants to try to play the sport like they do in baseball. And if we had that system and you could get drafted in either one of those sports and go play for a minor league system, I think we'd be a lot better off. That position on that team could be occupied by someone who truly wants to be in the academic world. And there's nothing wrong with a person that doesn't. We kind of get in the higher education realm, everybody needs to do this. I don't agree with that either. So let's move to one last topic and then we'll open it up.
We're running out of time. Let's take one or two questions from the audience.
Sure, yeah, I do, but go ahead, yeah. Any questions? Yes.
For Mrs. Ackerman, what was the best part of playing on a collegiate team when you played back in the day?
He said back in the day, by the way.
I thought he was going to ask me if I was wearing the same shirt from my last job. It's a great question. I would say the sisterhood, you know, just having that sorority, that feeling. I mean, it's actually funny when I started out at UVA, the sororities came at you quick. Fraternities were probably the same way because there's Greek life at UVA. And I remember my first year having to make a decision about whether I was going to, I forget, do you rush or do you get rushed? I don't know, whatever it is. And I decided at the end, I shouldn't because I was nervous that I wouldn't have the time to spend at the sorority house that they seemed to be looking for. And I remember feeling some remorse about that. But then when I joined my team, it became the sorority that I never had. So I would say it was just being part of that experience, you know, being sort of a sister with these, I don't know what the roster sizes were then, I forget, probably 13 or 14. The camaraderie, I actually just this week talked to one of my teammates who I keep up with. She's now a professor at the University of North Carolina. She's done some great things in her life. And, you know, we had a time together in our lives that was really unique. So I would say there was a lot of positives, but I'd put that at the top of the list.
We were athletes too, by the way. She might still
Very
be,
good
but
ones.
we were at some point. Doesn't look like it, but
Any other questions?
yes.
This is also a question for Mrs. Ackerman. With the whole Mavericks front office scandal that's come to light recently, it's kind of seemed like the business of sports is largely a boys' club. And I was just wondering what your experience as a woman in this business has been and if things have improved throughout your career.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I have to say, you know, I didn't. It's been a great. I've had a great career. I've been in the business for 30 years now, but at times I will say the journey's been pretty solitary. I mean, when I started out in sports, my first job was as a staff attorney at the NBA. I was hired by Gary Bettman, who's now the commissioner of the NHL. I was the only woman in the law department. There were very few women working in the NBA league office, and I literally had no women to look up to in the business. The good news is the men I worked for were terrific. They were mentors in every sense of the word, led by David Stern, the now retired commissioner. They opened doors for me. They got me onto boards. They, you know, had me listening in on conference calls and being in meetings. And I learned, you know. And for me, it was never about being a woman. It was just about how can I be the best professional that I can be in this business. It's a very demanding business. I mean, you know, it's a business where there's great sacrifice. I have two daughters. They're 25 and 23, a little older than most of you. And it was really tough. When they were growing up, I was just running out of the door to go to work. And I was jumping on airplanes and traveling around. And, I made a lot of sacrifices as a parent in order to do this work because it was a job I wanted. My husband was great about it. And I kind of think I made it up to my daughters in other ways, but I didn't have anybody to really talk to about that. So I would say that was the hardest part of it for me, was the balancing. And I would just say to any woman here who wants to work in sports, there are so many opportunities available to you now. I mean, you can work for a great athletic department like Texas or Alabama. We have in our offices, Bob's one of the finest women in our business. Drew Hancock is retiring from the Big 12, someone I've looked up to for many years and have learned from. There are women working in leagues now. There's many more women working at the NBA now than when I started. There's women working at networks that weren't there when I started. Women working in sports management companies that didn't used to work in that space. So I would sort of portray for you a good picture here. But I will say respect in the workplace, no matter where it is really important. And some of the things I've read about have been eye-opening for me. And, it's sort of reinforced to me as a leader that you can't take anything for granted in your workplace. We've got, I've got a small staff at the Big East. We only have 20 some odd people working for us in New York. But, we're going to have training. And I'm saying to myself, gee, I can't take anything for granted here. I got to make sure that everybody on my staff in this day and age knows what's right and what's not right. So I think as a leader, you have to not assume anything. And you've got to take the steps needed to make sure that everybody in your workforce understands the importance of professionalism, respect for others, harassment, discrimination, snide comments that you think are funny, but they're not. Somebody could take something in the wrong way. So I think we all have to be, I think this is it's sort of a reckoning for me right now, what we're having in our society. And I think it's something we all can and should learn from.
Let me speak to that, since it's right down the alley of what I'm doing now to try to help protect against what I call human relations risks. And what I think it was Greg alluded to earlier, organizations have been blinded to the inability of those the most vulnerable in the workplace to come forward with problems that they have. And we get to the leadership positions and we either don't remember what it was like, or we never felt what it was like to be in the most vulnerable positions. And so those doors have to be open. A lot of times we think, I'm a good person, I'll do the right thing, but then I even had the experience of not having somebody that was abused by a woman that's a rock star to me come forward and tell me about it. And I was mystified. I've been telling them all the time, I want you to have a good place to work. Come see me if you have a problem. And the person said what we've heard over and over in the Me Too movement and other places, and now you're in a high-profile, especially athletics director situation where you've got the power imbalance with coaches and others, and you have to create the culture and environment where people know where to go and what to do to bring up their issues that they have. And that's what I think now has to be done in all types of organizations, but in college sports in particular with the students and those people at the top. There has to be this verification of where to go, what to do, and the fact that you're going to have a good chance to get your problem solved. Education has to be a primary aspect of that. So, and I want to give credit. Val talked about all the opportunities for any of you women that are interested in this world of sports. I would first caution ask you if you're sane. But secondly, she's a reason for that. She's been a trailblazer. She's done a lot of things and opened a lot of doors, and people, she didn't have the mentor, but a lot of young women I know in the industry do have mentors like Val and others that have done this. So congratulations to you and thanks to you for all the opportunities that you're opening for other people.
Thank you.
I think on that note, we should say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.